Greetings viewers! This week there are two topical pieces of news involving Russia. Firstly, a few days ago it was the first anniversary of the death of Alexei Navalny, and in a few days' time it's the third anniversary of the military operation in Ukraine. As always on this channel, you'll be getting open, honest and frank reporting. If you don't like that, or if you're not really into the politics, then just click the mute button and come and enjoy a walk down what is undoubtedly Russia's most prestigious and iconic street, Nevsky Prospect, or Neva Avenue. This famous street in St. Petersburg stretches for 4.5 kilometers, and I'm planning to walk it all, show you guys the street. Now obviously discussing such topics will involve a fair degree of speculation, won't it? That's just the way it is. But I think, the best thing we can do is just take the facts, take what we know, and then try to extrapolate from that the most likely outcome. Let's deal with the Navalny case first. There's some outstanding issues with regards to the nature of his death and, whether he might have ever been president and what kind of president he might have been. Now, a lot of people in the West think that President Putin ordered Navalny's death, but I think that's improbable on the basis that he was held in Russian custody for 2.5 years, if I'm not mistaken. Now, if the president so desired his elimination, I'm pretty sure that would have been carried out in 2.5 days, not 2.5 years. On the contrary, it could be argued that Navalny's death was actually an extra headache for the president that he could have done without. Let's not forget, Navalny was serving a very long prison sentence. He was absolutely no threat to the president at all. Why make a martyr out of your foe? Just let him sit in the high security prison. Now, of course, the Russian gulags have been famous, haven't they, for, centuries now. During the Tsarist times and the Soviet times, people were exiled into the middle of nowhere. Everybody knew that returning to Russia, he would be putting his life in danger. So if everyone else knew it, he must have known it as well. But he still chose to do it. So obviously, he was prepared to die for his beliefs. The only other option is that he because of his adulation in the West, he may have started to believe his own hype too much and thought he was invincible. Political fanatics or religious fanatics, they are more than prepared to die for the cause. It's just an occupational hazard. Let's not forget that one of Navalny's biggest claims was that President Putin does away with anyone who opposes him. Now, of course, while he was still alive, this theory had no credibility. Now, prisons in Russia, I don't think they're like prisons, in Europe or somewhere where prisoners are just sitting around watching telly. These high security prisons up, in the Arctic Circle, wherever he was, my goodness, obviously the conditions would have been unimaginably harsh. In that Arctic tundra you can't grow fruit and vegetables or anything, and they certainly would have been imported for the prisoners, so the diet would have been very meagre. You wouldn't be getting vitamins out there in the middle of nowhere. Good medical facilities, then obviously forget that as well. So anyone that gets ill in such an environment is clearly going to have a major problem. The life expectancy in such places is very, very low once you're there. So with that in mind, then I think actually it's perfectly plausible that by top security prison standards up in the Arctic Circle, it was really a natural death. Could Navalny have ever been president, and how would it be if he was? On the plus side, obviously relations with the West would be better. Presumably it puts an end to the military operation in Ukraine as well. Although having said that, he was on record as saying that he didn't really see much difference between Russia and the Ukraine. So kind of he probably considered it one and the same territory, but still he'd have probably pulled out at the very least just to, please his Western friends. I guess he'd have been more of a Peter the Great than a Brezhnev type leader, you know, he'd probably tried to have modernised Russia. That might not have been easy, but he might have tried at least. I think a more pertinent question is, you know, could it ever have happened? Now, the first thing we need to consider is that who the West would like to be president of Russia is completely irrelevant. If you want to be president of Russia, then obviously the only thing that matters is what the Russian electorate thinks of you. Now, I thought he seemed alright, but I'm not Russian, and I'm not a Russian voter, so again, it doesn't matter what I think, all that matters is what the Russian people think. A lot of people in the West assume, incorrectly, that because he is popular in the West, that must mean he was popular in Russia as well. But that absolutely was not the case. The Western media tried to mislead people into thinking he was popular. There's always quotes, didn't they, about how he had a big following within the tech-savvy community and things like that. That's basically their way of saying that he had no popular support and no grassroots support across Russia at all. The inconvenient truth is that his support here amassed to about no more than 1% of the population. We can work that out by the amount of people that turned out at his rallies. Sure, tens of thousands of people turned out, but that's in a population of 150 million people. There's absolutely no reason why more people couldn't turn out. Like I say, tens of thousands of people did. There was no restrictions. Anyone who wanted to could, and plenty did. But again, that just amounts to a tiny fraction of the population. The main issue is this. Navalny's popularity in the West alienated him from the Russian people. All the things that made him popular in the West, his good looks and his anti-Kremlin views, these all caused suspicion in Russia. Russians are highly suspicious people. Anyone that's popular in the West is not going to be popular in Russia, and vice versa. Navalny was a suave, sophisticated oligarch, and the Russian people just couldn't relate to him. So even if the media coverage of Russia was fairer, now he'd probably have got more than 1% of Russians voting for him, sure, but he'd never have got enough to be president because Russians were just suspicious about his motives. As somebody who was seeking to be the president of Russia, he made the mistake of pleasing Western people, but not pleasing Russian people. Of course, owing to the slightly dubious nature of Western democracy, the West would have been more than happy to have someone with only 1% popularity running a country like Russia. That would absolutely suit their interests. But a lot of Russians were concerned that it might not suit their interests. Clearly such an approach isn't going to be accepted. On the contrary, it just fuels even more distrust of the West. Now, of course, it goes without saying that some Russians don't want Putin as president, but that doesn't automatically mean they wanted Navalny. So in conclusion, it was an impossible dream for Navalny and his small but vocal band of followers. We're on the eve of the third anniversary of the war in Ukraine, and what's interesting is that this week there's been some interesting developments. The new American president seems a bit more proactive than the last one with regards to trying to find some kind of resolution to the problem. Now, he seems to want to deal with Russia directly and just keep it between the big boys. Now, that seems to be causing some friction within the EU and Ukraine, who are worried that they're going to be cut out of any deal. It's clear that Trump and Putin do seem to have some mutual respect for each other, whereas there is none between Putin and Biden. So I think with regards to trying to resolve the Ukraine issue, Trump's appointment as president might not be such a bad thing. You know, Trump and Putin are two peas in a pod, really, aren't they? they're quite similar. They're both no-nonsense characters that want the best for their country and will go about getting it by any means possible. It's also quite clear that both Russia and the United States have rather a contempt for the EU, who they consider to be just a mismatch of random countries with no real substance. I think that Russia and the United States, they're kind of more pragmatic than the European countries. As the two kind of superpowers, they understand each other to a certain extent. They realise how things are, whereas with the EU and Ukraine it's more of an ideological approach. Ukraine are now finding out what Korea and Vietnam found out before, and that is that when the superpowers engage in a kind of proxy type war on your territory, then your only involvement is the fact that it's taking place on your territory. Korea and Vietnam had no say in the partition of their countries, so I don't think we can be surprised if Ukraine will have very little say in the partition of theirs. It seems to start that Ukraine naively thought that the West were helping out the goodness of their hearts, but I think now they're finding out that that's not the case. It does seem that both Russia and the US don't really see themselves as doing business with Zelensky on a long-term basis, and for that reason I guess sooner or later Zelensky is going to have to put his country before his ego and step down before he's pushed down. So realistically it seems that Ukraine and the EU are just going to have to accept the United States and Russia's conditions whether they like it or not. Now, rather ridiculously, considering what's gone on here and the American view on this for the past 3 years, the other day President Trump said that if for United States security he's got to take Greenland, then he will do so. There's basically no difference between the US policy and the Russian policy. So the end is in sight.